In the summer of 1782, as the Revolutionary War dragged toward an uncertain conclusion, a letter arrived at George Washington's headquarters in Newburgh, New York. Couriers moved through rows of worn tents and weathered huts, where officers and soldiers waited on long overdue pay and supplies. Inside a dimly lit room, Washington's aides broke the seal. What they unfolded was no ordinary complaint about Congress, but a proposal that quietly challenged the entire Republican experiment. The letter came from Colonel Louis Nicola, a respected officer, who argued that the Confederation Congress seemed incapable of stabilizing the nation. In carefully reasoned language, he described financial collapse, unpaid troops, and political confusion as symptoms of a deeper failure. Nicola suggested that a well-designed constitutional monarchy, with Washington as its head, might provide the firmness and dignity the Republic lacked. Among unpaid officers, many of whom had sacrificed fortunes, the idea no longer sounded unthinkable. As the contents of Nicola's words circulated in hushed conversations, the atmosphere around Newburgh felt precarious. The army stood restless, victory appeared near but not secure, and faith in civilian leaders had eroded. In this fragile moment, the notion of an American king seemed, to some, a practical solution rather than a betrayal. That evening, Washington sat down at his writing table, took up his pen, and began drafting a reply that would decide how firmly America rejected monarchy. As the guns of the Revolutionary War fell silent, victory brought little relief to the new United States. The Continental Congress stood nearly bankrupt. Its paper currency depreciated and foreign loans strained. Promised pay and pensions for officers and enlisted soldiers went unmet. In dimly lit encampments, men read grim notices from Congress and watched creditors descend on their families back home. The patriotic sacrifice that had fueled the war now seemed betrayed by legislative paralysis. Anger spread quietly but steadily through the army. Letters passed hand to hand, denouncing Congress for broken promises and warning that Republican government had produced only weakness and confusion. Petitions gathered signatures, appealing for long-delayed compensation and stability. In private diary entries, officers recorded rising talk of resignation, refusal to disband, even organized pressure on civil authorities. Rumors of mutiny haunted congressional debates, as delegates argued over taxation powers they still lacked under the Articles of Confederation. Against this backdrop, comparisons with Great Britain grew sharper. There, a monarch and a powerful parliament seemed to guarantee order, credit, and effective taxation. In America, the Articles of Confederation left Congress dependent on reluctant states, unable to enforce its will or fund its army. Some political and military elites began to wonder if unrestrained liberty had slid into anarchy. A strong, single executive, echoing European kingship, suddenly appeared to many as a possible shield against disunion and civil war. The letter from Louis Nicola reached George Washington as the Revolutionary War entered its final phase. In cautious phrases, it suggested that the fragile new nation might need a monarch, and hinted that Washington himself could fill that role. Washington's reply of May 22, 1782, unfolded in firm, measured prose. He wrote that the proposal caused him pain beyond any other occurrence in the war, and that it stirred both indignation and sorrow in his mind. Sentence by sentence, Washington dismantled the idea. He declared that such suggestions were big with mischief to the country, warning that even entertaining them threatened the revolution's legitimacy. He insisted that no military success granted him authority to alter the form of government. His words reaffirmed civilian supremacy and Republican virtue, reminding his correspondent that the army served the people and their representatives, not the other way around, and that personal ambition must never override public principle. Behind the formal language stood Washington's fear of resembling Oliver Cromwell or Julius Caesar, military leaders who had turned victory into personal rule. Throughout the conflict, he had been reluctant to seize power beyond necessity, aware that Americans watched his every move as a guide to future leadership. His sharp rejection of kingship therefore became more than a private rebuke. It was a conscious act that helped define the United States as a republic, not a monarchy, at its very birth. Nicola's plea for an American monarchy had not stood alone. It belonged to a quieter current among revolutionary leaders who doubted that unfiltered republicanism could endure. In private letters and political essays, several influential figures praised elements of the British Constitution, especially its balance between king, lords, and commons. They feared that the new United States, if founded on what they called pure democracy, might dissolve into faction, demagoguery, and economic chaos. Gouverneur Morris and Alexander Hamilton emerged as leading voices in this skeptical camp. Before and during the Constitutional Convention, their writing suggested that the British system, with its mixture of monarchy and aristocracy, provided a model of stability. Hamilton submitted a plan in Philadelphia that called for a national executive chosen for life, under good behavior, and for senators also holding life tenure. To critics, such proposals looked uncomfortably like an elective monarchy grafted onto a republican frame. Behind closed doors, elite fears of mass democracy often surfaced with surprising frankness. Convention notes and private correspondence recorded anxious references to ancient Athens and Rome, where republics had collapsed amid popular unrest and ambitious leaders. Some delegates argued that only strong, durable executive power could restrain what they termed the turbulence of the people. Others, while rejecting hereditary rule, still spoke of stable, quasi-monarchical authority as a necessary barrier against the specter of mob rule. Across the Atlantic, the American Revolution was not only a war story, it was a constitutional puzzle. In Paris, Versailles, and other European courts, ministers and philosophers studied the fragile confederation with skepticism. Charles Gravier de Vergennes, France's influential foreign minister, regarded the United States as an experiment unlikely to last in purely republican form. Many European observers assumed that sooner or later Americans would look for a stabilizing monarch. Within this atmosphere, a strange possibility quietly circulated, that the new republic might import a king from Europe. In private letters and memoranda, diplomats floated the notion of sending a prince from an established dynasty, perhaps a younger son of the House of Bourbon, to sit on an American throne. Such suggestions never appeared in official American negotiations, yet they surfaced in drawing rooms, embassies, and salons where long-term strategies for the post-war world were discussed. Surviving diplomatic correspondence and later memoirs showed how seriously some statesmen considered an eventual American crown. They believed a foreign-born monarch could anchor alliances, restrain internal faction, and bind the United States to Europe's balance of power system. To these observers, a vast republic without a royal figure seemed inherently unstable. Their speculation revealed less about American intentions than about old-world assumptions that, in the end, monarchy would reclaim even the bold experiment across the sea. In the turbulent 1780s, the mountains of western North Carolina, in what later became eastern Tennessee, lay at the ragged edge of the young republic. Settlers there felt abandoned by distant legislators in Raleigh and ignored by Congress in New York. Protection against Native American raids came late, land claims remained tangled, and tax burdens felt unfair. Out of this frustration grew the self-declared State of Franklin, a fragile experiment that pressed beyond the constitutional debates in Philadelphia. Leaders on the frontier circulated letters and petitions arguing that neglect from North Carolina justified a separate government. Some correspondents looked across the Atlantic for solutions, suggesting that stability, foreign recognition, and access to credit might come faster under a crowned ruler than under a disputed Republican charter. Reports and later accounts indicated that a radical proposal emerged to invite Prince Henry of Prussia to become a hereditary sovereign over this Appalachian polity, imagined as a kingdom called Franklin. Prince Henry, younger brother of Frederick the Great, already enjoyed a European reputation as a capable general and an advocate of enlightened reform. These qualities made him seem, from a distance, a plausible guarantor of order on the American frontier. The plan never moved beyond discussion and speculative correspondence, and Prince Henry never set foot in the region. Yet the episode revealed that monarchy, even after independence, remained a real, if fleeting, option in the political imagination of early America. In the 1780s, the bruises of monarchy still marked American politics. During the Constitutional Convention and the ratification struggle that followed, critics of the proposed presidency warned that the new office looked dangerously familiar. Anti-Federalist pamphlets described it as an elective monarchy. arguing that a single chief magistrate, armed with veto power, command of the military, and a 4-year term with possible re-election, risked sliding into lifetime rule. To them, the revolution's victory seemed imperiled at its constitutional birth. These anxieties erupted in the state ratifying conventions. Opponents insisted that the Constitution had tilted power toward the executive, away from local assemblies and the people. They worried that treaties, appointments, and the role of commander-in-chief gave the president tools a would-be monarch could exploit. The debates turned vivid when some senators floated courtly presidential titles, including the elaborate European-sounding phrase, "His Highness, the President of the United States of America, and protector of their liberties." The controversy forced an uneasy nation to define what a Republican executive should look like. In practice, George Washington's conduct reassured many skeptics. He accepted the plain title President of the United States and rejected ornate ceremonies, avoiding royal-style levees and trappings. He walked a careful line between dignity and simplicity, traveling without excessive pomp and observing legal limits. Yet public fears endured, as critics claimed that, despite the missing crown, the new government echoed the British system in structure and spirit. In late 1783, after victory in the Revolutionary War, George Washington arrived in Annapolis to surrender his commission as commander-in-chief. The Confederation Congress met in the Maryland State House, where members and spectators crowded into the chamber. Contemporary observers described a solemn stillness as Washington rose, his written address in hand. He thanked the army, deferred to civilian authority, and formally resigned, stunning foreign diplomats who expected a victorious general to seize power. Eyewitnesses reached for classical imagery to explain what they had seen. In letters and newspaper reports, some compared Washington to Cincinnatus, the Roman farmer who laid down extraordinary powers and returned to his fields. European commentators, accustomed to hereditary monarchs and military usurpers, noted how unusual the scene appeared. Instead of marching on the Capitol, the American general bowed to an elected assembly, reinforcing the idea that legitimacy flowed from law and representation, not from the sword. This pattern repeated a decade later. Although many citizens urged Washington to accept a third presidential term, he decided in 1796 not to run again. Figures such as Thomas Jefferson and John Adams in private letters weighed the implications of his departure, while newspapers at home and observers abroad remarked on a leader stepping down voluntarily. By refusing to cling to office twice, Washington quietly answered all whispers of American kingship and helped fix the expectation that even great authority remained temporary. In the 1790s, George Washington's Republican example did not silence fears of monarchy. As the new federal government took shape, arguments over ceremony and status grew sharper. John Adams, as vice president and then president, occupied the center of these disputes. He openly favored elevated forms of address for high officials, insisting that titles and dignified ritual helped preserve respect for the office, not create a throne in disguise. Adams's essays, later known as Discourses on Davila, deepened the controversy. Drawing on European history, he warned that human vanity and ambition could destabilize republics. Critics, however, read his praise of social hierarchy and strong executive authority as a blueprint for aristocracy. When Congress passed the Alien and Sedition Acts in 1798, opponents claimed Adams had moved from theory to practice, branding dissent as disloyalty and edging the republic toward tyranny. Partisan printers and engravers turned these anxieties into vivid images. Political cartoons depicted Adams in royal robes or perched on a throne, while Federalists appeared as would-be nobles. Democratic Republican newspapers denounced them as crypto-monarchists and cast themselves as defenders of simple manners, frugality, and local power. These ideological battles over luxury, ceremony, and central authority showed how the early memory of almost choosing a king continued to shape American political debate. In retrospect, Joseph Reed's warning about a bold push for royalty, Louis Nicholas' proposal to George Washington, and the rumors of importing a European prince all formed parts of a single fragile moment. The young republic sat between fear of chaos and fear of tyranny. Washington's firm refusal, the collapse of schemes for foreign royalty, and the Constitutional Convention's distrust of hereditary power together closed one path, but only barely. The presidency that emerged in 1787 balanced strength with deliberate limits, a single executive but elected, powerful but hemmed in by Congress, courts, and elections. Washington's refusal of a crown and his voluntary retirement set a precedent of Republican restraint. Yet the office itself, with its veto, command of the military, and prominence in foreign affairs, carried a latent potential for something that critics later called an American monarchy. Across the 20th century, that potential surfaced in debates over the imperial presidency, from expansive wartime powers to sweeping claims of executive privilege. Modern observers sometimes described the pageantry of inaugurations, state funerals, and presidential libraries as almost royal. The United States remained a republic, yet the aura surrounding some presidents hinted at how thin the line had been. A few different decisions in the 1780s might have normalized a crown instead of a constitution.